Hello, my name's Nick Lange. This is my Assessment 3 video for Science Education for 2019. So I'll give you some background information on the school. So I was at Kapunda Primary School, which is in the Barossa Valley. There is 28 kids in the class that I was in. It was a Year 6-7 class with 10 students being Year 6s and 18 students being Year 7s. There was 5 students who were on individual learning plans, but obviously for science this didn't impact them. They didn't have any individual learning plans specifically for science, it was more for the other subjects. The science topic that the students will be investigating is food chains. So specifically they'll be focusing on the relationships between animals, organisms and humans. And then from the information that they find through the investigation, they will represent this in a food chain or food web that they'll design on their own. They'll have gone on Google and found some images of food chains, but ultimately they'll design it on their own, A3 piece of paper, and it's a time for them to be creative and just be in charge of their own learning. In terms of the students' prior knowledge, I had a discussion with them before the lesson, and they didn't have a lot of prior knowledge on the topic. They sort of understood that animals eat each other, but they didn't understand, the cycle about how, animals eat plants, which the plants grow from the sun, and then we then eat the animals, eat the plants, and just they don't have a great understanding of the relationship between the three. So that is something that they will be investigating, will be learning more about during the investigation. So the investigation was given to the students in the form of a PowerPoint. So it started off with introducing the topic like I've just done to you guys, but in the PowerPoint. So I had it laid out. So the first slide was introducing the topic like I said, and then the students were first asked to answer the 4 questions individually, which were: why are green plants called producers? Why are animals called consumers? What is a predator and what is a prey? And that is something they did first, and then once they had done that individually, then rolled on to the next task, which is the inquiry-based investigation that the students will work on in pairs. So this is explained by the teacher with the aid of a PowerPoint. So it was sort of set out like this. So from this, the students then, in pairs, you are to create and conduct your own investigation between the relationships of animals, plants and humans, looking at producers, consumers, predators and prey. So you'll present it in the form of a food web or food chain, and then present your findings to the class. So this is obviously going to be different as they're working in pairs. It's all not going to be the same, which is excellent and what an inquiry-based investigation is about. You'll have 2 lessons to complete the task, and then you can run your own research and find your own information on the animals that you choose, the plants that you choose for your food web and food chain. So this is how it was explained to the students. I then had a discussion with the students at the end of introducing the topic. The first question was, were the instructions of the task clear? The general feedback was that it was easy to understand for them, and there wasn't a large amount of questions that were needed to be asked after the introduction of the topic, which was good. And then, did you enjoy leading your own investigation and research? So this was done at the end. The general feedback amongst class was that they thought it was very meaningful and interesting that they got to run their own science investigation, be in charge of their own learning. They thought that was pretty cool. And there were some students who weren't interested, thought it was too hard, didn't want to partake, and those students, there was about 4 or 5 of them, and they didn't get a lot of work done. It was hard to motivate them because they didn't know what to do, but they did know what to do, they just didn't want to do it, so they just used it as excuses. So that was hard when teaching, because you only had a certain amount of time to get it done, and obviously you wanted some students to be able to complete it. So the inquiry questions that the students planned to research, they were created on their own, sort of with the aid of the teacher. There was some guidance in the questions. When they would come up with one, they would then sit down with me, and we'd run through it, whether the question's good enough, whether there's too much words in there, they need to simplify it a bit more. And this took a bit of time. This probably took 20 minutes at the beginning of the first lesson. but every question was based along the lines of what effects do animals, plants and humans have on each other. So this is what the task was about, and then from this they would present all their information found in the form of a food chain or food web. And obviously the questions varied in wording slightly, but they were all investigating very similar things. So the inquiry skills that were targeted were, the first one was developing strategies and techniques for effective research using secondary sources, including the use of the internet. So during our HASS subject, we were doing an ancient Greek research project where students struggled to find information. They struggled to skim read, they struggled to research. So this is something that I wanted to focus on as not a cross-curricular link, but we found this as an issue for the students, and this was a good way for them to be able to improve on that. And the second one was working collaboratively to decide how to approach an investigation. So obviously they had to work in pairs, and there's not one right or wrong way to go about doing this investigation. I know some students wanted to lay out how their food chain was going to look and then fill in the animals and plants on the food chain afterwards, whereas some students worked together and they got all their research done and then put the food chain together at the end. So this is something that helped the students to develop this skill, and it was interesting to watch the way that some of the students went about it. Investigation, the students learnt that food can be traced back to plants and that the sun is the most ultimate source of energy. So the students learnt the relationship between animals and animals, and then the relationship between plants and animals, and how that relationship has a huge impact on us as humans. So through the research they found out how many animals ate plants, and then we would then eat those animals. So this was interesting for them, and as they eat that food, it became meaningful to them as they were able to relate to it. So this was excellent as they got to run their own learning, so they wanted to use animals that they eat or have seen in the wild, or just like the animals. So then the students will also learn what producers, consumers, predators and prey are, and then the research was done online and individually with a discussion at the end about each one as a class. So that was the first task. And then the students' knowledge at the end should all be the same, because we had a discussion at the end and come up with all our findings. So this was good for the students to see what other students had seen and found on the internet compared to what they had found. So inquiry-based learning focuses on students being in control of the learning process rather than the teacher telling them the students what information they need to know. So science can be a subject that doesn't interest some students, and that growing up, there were some students in our class that had no interest in science whatsoever. So using inquiry-based learning is a way of improving the engagement of students and their overall attitude towards science. So the students get to find the information required on their own, which makes it more meaningful to them rather than just hearing it from a teacher. So if they're finding it themselves, they get excited that they found that piece of information rather than the teacher just giving it to them. And it allows the students to be more engaged in their learning as they are, again, in complete control. So teaching science in familiar context will help the students to build on understandings when they learn in a meaningful environment. Giving the students the opportunity to be involved in an inquiry-based learning investigation is excellent, as they get to be in charge of their learning. This creates a learning environment that is meaningful to the students, again, rather than being told what they need to know by the teacher, which can be quite boring for some of the students. And Gangle et al. 2017 states that during learning-centered teaching, the learners actively participate in the decision-making process about what to learn, how to learn, and what kind of help is required, and how to decide how much is to be learned. This is what inquiry-based learning is all about. It is engaging for the students. So this is why the investigation was laid out like that. So they were given the opportunity to do all of that, and it was backed up by literature that this is important for the students when learning about science and for the improvement of their engagement. Science, you want students to feel like scientists, not as if it's just another lesson where they're being taught by the teacher and just being told all the information. So Walker 2015 states that the work students do in inquiry-based learning science mirrors the work which scientists do when they are conducting research. So doing this and explaining to the students is going to be much more engaging for them rather than just giving them information. So this is a part of my pedagogy as a teacher, and especially when teaching science, is to make the students feel like they are scientists and they get to investigate and hypothesize. Although they didn't do a hypothesis for this investigation, that is something that I'll want to do with my students. It's much more fun for the students, more engaging, and they feel like they have accomplished a lot more rather than just filling out a science worksheet, for example. So that is what I've found from teaching that in my evaluation, and I feel like the lesson went well, and it was set out well, and the students did enjoy it, apart from the few that obviously struggled. It was disappointing I didn't have my students' work samples as I left them at the school. But it was a successful little unit or lesson plan that I got to do with the kids, and yeah.